The envelope in my mailbox might as well have been soaking wet with venom when I pulled it out on that Tuesday afternoon in Gilbert, Arizona. I could tell from the HOA return address and the certified mail sticker that this wasn't going to be good news, but nothing could have prepared me for what was inside. A lawsuit demanding $47,000 for property damage allegedly caused by my oak tree's roots destroying the foundation and landscaping of my neighbor's home. My name is Quinton Valdez, and I had been living peacefully in my 3-bedroom ranch house in the Sunset Ridge subdivision for 8 years. I'm a software engineer who works from home, keeps to himself, and has never caused trouble for anyone. My property was well maintained, my lawn was always mowed, and I paid my HOA dues on time every single month without fail. The massive oak tree in my front yard had been there long before I bought the house, probably 50 years old at least, and it was one of the main reasons I fell in love with the property in the first place. The shade it provided during Arizona's brutal summers was worth its weight in gold. The lawsuit came from Patricia Henderson, the HOA president who lived 2 houses down from me. Patricia was the textbook definition of a Karen, complete with the asymmetrical blonde bob haircut, perpetually pursed lips, and an attitude that suggested the entire neighborhood existed solely for her approval. She was in her late 40s, drove a white Mercedes SUV with custom plates that read HOA, and had made it her personal mission to enforce every single rule in our neighborhood's covenant with the enthusiasm of a medieval inquisitor. I had dealt with Patricia's nonsense before. She once sent me a violation notice because my trash cans were visible from the street for 20 minutes past the pickup time, even though the garbage truck was running late that day. Another time, she tried to fine me because my house number plaque had faded slightly in the sun and wasn't the exact shade of bronze specified in the HOA guidelines. But this lawsuit was on an entirely different level. I sat down at my kitchen table and read through the legal documents with growing disbelief. According to the complaint, my oak tree's roots had somehow traveled underground, crossed property lines, destroyed Patricia's irrigation system, cracked her foundation, and caused extensive damage to her landscaping. The attached photographs showed cracked pavement in her driveway, dead patches in her lawn, and what appeared to be some foundation issues near her garage. The lawsuit claimed that I had been negligent in maintaining my tree, that I had ignored previous warnings about the root system, and that I was liable for all damages plus legal fees. The problem was, I had never received any warnings about my tree. Not a single one. I kept meticulous records of all HOA correspondence, and there was nothing in my files about tree maintenance or root issues. This lawsuit was literally the first I was hearing about any problems. I immediately called my homeowner's insurance company, hoping they would cover this kind of claim. After being transferred 3 times and spending 40 minutes on hold, I finally reached an adjuster named Marcus who listened to my story and then delivered the bad news. My policy specifically excluded damage caused by tree roots to other properties unless I had been notified of the hazard and failed to act. Since I had no documentation of prior warnings, the insurance company would investigate, but I shouldn't get my hopes up about coverage. That night, I couldn't sleep. $47,000 would devastate me financially. I had some savings, but not nearly enough to cover that kind of expense. I kept thinking about Patricia and her smug expression whenever she patrolled the neighborhood looking for violations. She had always seemed to have a particular focus on my property, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this lawsuit was more about control and power than actual damages. The next morning, I decided to do something I should have done immediately. I went to look at Patricia's property myself. I walked down the street just after sunrise, while the neighborhood was still quiet. Patricia's house was a large two-story Mediterranean-style home with a perfectly manicured front lawn, decorative stone borders, and an elaborate landscaping design featuring desert plants, ornamental grasses, and a rock garden. From the sidewalk, I could see her driveway, and sure enough, there were several cracks running through the concrete, but something didn't add up. The cracks weren't running in a pattern that suggested root intrusion. They looked more random, like settling damage or water erosion. And the dead patches in her lawn weren't near where my tree's roots would logically extend. Oak trees typically have root systems that spread about 1.5 times the width of the canopy, and my tree's canopy didn't extend anywhere close to those dead spots. I pulled out my phone and took several photographs from the public sidewalk, making sure to document everything. As I was taking the last photo, I noticed something interesting. Patricia's sprinkler system was running, and there was a significant amount of water pooling near her driveway. One of the sprinkler heads appeared to be broken, shooting water directly at the foundation of her house rather than dispersing it across the lawn. Another sprinkler was creating a steady stream that ran down her driveway, following the exact path of those cracks. My mind started racing. Could Patricia's own irrigation system be causing the damage she was blaming on my tree? It would explain why the damage patterns didn't match typical root intrusion. It would also explain why she had never mentioned any problems before. She might have only recently noticed the damage and jumped to the wrong conclusion, or worse, knowingly blamed me to avoid paying for repairs herself. I needed professional help, and I needed it fast. I spent that morning researching arborists in the Phoenix area, and found a company called Desert Tree Specialists with excellent reviews and credentials. The owner, Dr. Raymond Chen, was a certified arborist with a PhD in plant biology and had testified as an expert witness in similar cases before. I called his office and explained my situation to his assistant, who squeezed me in for an emergency consultation that afternoon. Dr. Chen arrived at my house at 3 o'clock in a truck loaded with equipment. He was a slim man in his early 60s with gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the calm, methodical demeanor of someone who had spent decades studying trees. I showed him the lawsuit documents and explained everything that had happened. He listened carefully, taking notes on a tablet, and then asked to see my oak tree. We walked out to the front yard, and Dr. Chen spent 20 minutes examining the tree from every angle. He took measurements of the trunk diameter, estimated the age, checked the overall health, and used some kind of electronic device to scan the root structure beneath the soil. Finally, he pulled out a long metal probe and began testing the soil density at various points around the tree, creating a rough map of where the major roots were likely located. "Your tree is in excellent health," Dr. Chen said, making more notes. "The root system is well established, but not aggressive. Oak trees of this age typically have deep taproots with lateral roots that spread wide but relatively shallow. Based on my initial assessment, I'd estimate the roots extend about 40 feet from the trunk at most." "Patricia's house is 2 properties away," I said. "That's got to be at least 150 feet. Closer to 200, actually," Dr. Chen said, squinting down the street. "I'll need to do a more thorough investigation, but preliminarily, I'd say it's highly unlikely your tree's roots are causing damage at that distance. Oak roots can travel far, but they follow the path of least resistance and seek out water sources. If there were problems at your neighbor's property, I'd expect to see issues at the properties in between as well." I felt a surge of relief, but Dr. Chen held up a hand. However, I need to see the alleged damage site before I can make any definitive conclusions. Would it be possible to access the neighbor's property? That was the tricky part. I explained who Patricia was and her position as HOA president. Dr. Chen nodded knowingly. I've dealt with HOA situations before. Here's what I recommend. Since you've been sued, you have a legal right to inspect the property in question as part of building your defense. I'll prepare a formal letter requesting access for a professional inspection. If she refuses, that actually works in your favor in court. Dr. Chen drafted the letter right there on his tablet and emailed it to me. It was professional, courteous, and made it clear that access was being requested as part of my legal defense preparation. I printed it out, signed it, and walked down to Patricia's house to deliver it in person. Patricia answered the door wearing yoga clothes and holding a glass of white wine, even though it was only 4 in the afternoon. Her expression immediately soured when she saw me standing on her porch. "Quinton," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm surprised you have the nerve to show up here." "I'm not here to argue," I said, keeping my voice level. "I've been served with your lawsuit and I'm exercising my legal right to inspect the alleged damage. This letter formally requests access to your property for my arborist to conduct an examination." Patricia snatched the letter from my hand and scanned it quickly. Her face reddened. "You're not bringing anyone onto my property. The damage is obvious, and I have my own experts who have documented everything." "Then you won't mind a second opinion," I said. "If you refuse access, I'll have my attorney file a motion with the court to compel inspection. That will delay the case, cost both of us more money in legal fees, and make you look like you're hiding something. Or you can let Dr. Chen take a look tomorrow morning, and we can all move forward with the facts." I could see the calculation happening behind Patricia's eyes. She was used to intimidating people in the neighborhood, used to getting her way through sheer force of personality and her position as HOA president. But this was a legal matter now, and she knew I was right about the court compelling access. "Fine," she finally said. "Tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Your expert can look around, but this doesn't change anything. Your tree destroyed my property and you're going to pay for it." She slammed the door before I could respond. I walked back home feeling like I'd won a small victory, but I knew the real battle was just beginning. Dr. Chen returned the next morning at 8:45 with an assistant named Julie, a young woman with a measuring tape, a camera, and several cases of equipment. We walked down to Patricia's house together, and she was waiting for us on her front porch, arms crossed, looking like a guard dog protecting its territory. "Let's get this over with," Patricia said. "I have a Pilates class at 10:30, Dr." Chen introduced himself professionally and explained what he would be doing. "I'll be examining the damage patterns, testing soil composition, checking for evidence of root intrusion and documenting my findings. This should take about 2 hours. 2 hours. Patricia's voice rose. "Are you kidding me? Thorough investigations take time, Mrs. Henderson," Dr. Chen said calmly. "If you'd prefer, you can go to your Pilates class and we'll lock up when we're done." Patricia clearly didn't like that idea. She followed us around her property like a hawk, watching every move, making snide comments and generally trying to be as difficult as possible. Dr. Chen ignored her completely, focusing on his work with impressive professionalism. The first thing he examined was the driveway cracks. He used a small camera on a flexible cable to look into the cracks, checking their depth and composition. Then he took soil samples from around the damaged areas. He measured the distance from my oak tree and used GPS coordinates to create precise measurements. "Mrs. Henderson," Doctor Chen said after about 30 minutes. I notice your sprinkler system is quite elaborate. How old is it? I had it installed 5 years ago, Patricia said. Top of the line, cost me $15,000. And when was the last time it was inspected or serviced? Patricia's expression flickered with uncertainty. I don't know. Why does that matter? Because, Dr. Chen said, standing up from where he'd been examining a section of dead grass, these damage patterns are consistent with water intrusion, not root damage. See here, he pointed to the dead patch. The grass has died from overwatering, not from roots stealing nutrients. And this soil sample shows extremely high moisture content, much higher than it should be in Arizona's climate with normal irrigation. That's ridiculous, Patricia snapped. I have a smart system that waters exactly the right amount. Smart systems can malfunction, Dr. Chen said. May I examine your sprinkler controls? Patricia led us to a panel on the side of her house, clearly annoyed. Dr. Chen opened it and immediately let out a low whistle. Mrs. Henderson, when was the last time you looked at this panel? I don't look at it. It's automatic. Well, you should look at it now. Dr. Chen stepped aside so we could see. The control panel was showing multiple error codes and several of the zone indicators were flashing red. Your system has been malfunctioning, possibly for months. These error codes indicate broken sprinkler heads, zone failures, and water pressure issues. Patricia's face went pale. But I never received any alerts. Did you set up the phone app to receive alerts? Dr. Chen asked. She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Dr. Chen spent the next hour documenting everything. He found 3 broken sprinkler heads that were shooting water directly at the foundation. He discovered a major leak in one of the underground lines that had been saturating the soil beneath the driveway, explaining the cracks. He documented how the overwatering had killed sections of the lawn and created pooling that was causing erosion. Meanwhile, Julie had been conducting her own investigation, using ground-penetrating radar to map the subsurface around Patricia's property. She called Dr. Chen over to look at her laptop screen, where colorful images showed what was beneath the ground. No root intrusion, Julie said, pointing at the screen. I'm picking up the water lines, some buried electrical and normal root activity from the desert plants in her landscaping, but nothing consistent with oak tree roots. The nearest roots from Mr. Valdez's tree are still about 130 feet away, and they're running in the opposite direction, toward his backyard. Dr. Chen nodded and made more notes. Finally, after 2 full hours of investigation, he turned to Patricia with a serious expression. Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to be frank with you. There is no evidence whatsoever that Mr. Valdez's oak tree has caused any damage to your property. The damage you're experiencing is entirely caused by your own malfunctioning irrigation system. The overwatering has saturated your soil, causing your driveway to crack and settle. The broken sprinkler heads have been shooting water directly at your foundation, which is causing the damage you mentioned in your lawsuit. The dead patches in your lawn are from localized flooding, not root competition. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. That can't be right. I had someone look at this. Who did you have look at it? Dr. Chen asked, my landscaper. He said it was definitely tree roots. Is your landscaper a certified arborist or structural engineer? Patricia didn't answer. I thought not, Dr. Chen said. Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to prepare a full report of my findings with photographic evidence, soil analysis, and GPR imaging. I'll be submitting this to the court as expert testimony. If I were you, I'd seriously consider dropping this lawsuit before you waste any more money on legal fees for a case you're going to lose. I had never seen Patricia Henderson speechless before, but in that moment, She had nothing to say. Her face was red, her hands were clenched into fists, and I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she realized how badly she'd messed up. We left her standing in her yard and walked back to my house. Once we were inside, I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 2 days straight. "That was incredible," I said to Dr. Chen. "Thank you so much." "I'm just doing my job," he said, "but I want you to be prepared. Even with this evidence, Mrs. Henderson might not drop the lawsuit. Some people dig in their heels when they're proven wrong, especially if they have a position of authority they're trying to protect. You need a good attorney." He was right. I spent the rest of that day calling lawyers, and by Friday, I had retained an attorney named Sarah Winters who specialized in property disputes and HOA issues. Sarah was a sharp woman in her mid-30s with a reputation for taking on difficult cases and winning. When I showed her Dr. Chen's preliminary findings and explained the situation, her eyes lit up. "This is actually a pretty straightforward case," Sarah said. "We have expert testimony that directly contradicts the plaintiff's claims. More than that, we can argue that she filed a frivolous lawsuit without proper evidence, which opens the door for us to seek sanctions and attorney's fees." "You mean I could get my legal costs back?" I asked. "If the judge agrees the lawsuit was frivolous or filed in bad faith, absolutely. And given that she's the HOA president and appears to be abusing her position, we might have additional claims for harassment or abuse of process." Sarah filed our response to the lawsuit and included Dr. Chen's report as an exhibit. She also filed a counterclaim seeking attorney's fees, costs, and damages for the stress and harm caused by Patricia's baseless accusations. The response was filed 3 weeks after I'd been served, right at the deadline. What happened next was something I didn't expect. 2 days after our response was filed, I received an email from another neighbor in the subdivision, a guy named Marcus Thompson who lived on the other side of Patricia. The email was brief. "I heard about your lawsuit with Patricia. Can we talk? I might have information that helps your case." I called Marcus that evening, and what he told me made my blood boil. Apparently, Patricia had been targeting multiple homeowners in the neighborhood with frivolous violations and complaints, always finding some way to fine people or make their lives difficult. Marcus himself had been hit with a $500 fine for having a decorative garden gnome that Patricia claimed violated the no lawn ornaments clause in the HOA covenant, even though several other homes had similar decorations that she ignored. "The thing is," Marcus said, "I started doing some digging after she came after me. Patricia has been using her position as HOA president to harass people she doesn't like, and I found out something interesting. She's been paying herself a salary from the HOA funds." "Is that legal?" I asked. "It depends on what the HOA bylaws say. So I got a copy of the bylaws, which any homeowner has a right to request, and guess what? There's no provision for paying the president a salary. But the bank statements show she's been writing herself checks for $2,000 a month for the past 3 years. My mind was reeling. If what Marcus was saying was true, Patricia had embezzled over $70,000 from the HOA. That was a serious crime, way beyond just being a difficult neighbor. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I'm tired of her getting away with it," Marcus said, "and because I think if enough of us stand up to her, we can get her removed and fix this neighborhood. I've talked to other homeowners, and we're all willing to back you up if this goes to court." I told Sarah about this development, and she was very interested. "If we can prove embezzlement, that changes everything. It shows a pattern of abuse of authority and gives us leverage. But we need to be careful. Embezzlement is a criminal matter, not a civil one. We need to involve law enforcement." "Should we do that?" I asked. "Let me do some more investigating first," Sarah said. "We need solid proof before we make accusations like that." Over the next month, Sarah worked with Marcus and several other homeowners to gather evidence. They obtained copies of HOA financial records, bank statements, and meeting minutes. What they found was damning. Patricia had been systematically stealing from the HOA for years. She'd started small, approving consulting fees for herself that weren't in the budget. Then she'd graduated to writing checks directly from the HOA account to herself, marking them as administrative expenses or management fees. The total amount was closer to $90,000. Meanwhile, the lawsuit was proceeding through the court system. We had a preliminary hearing scheduled for late November where both sides would present their evidence, and the judge would decide if the case had merit to continue to trial. Sarah was confident, but I was a nervous wreck. I'd never been involved in a lawsuit before, and the whole experience was overwhelming. The hearing was held at the Maricopa County Superior Court in downtown Phoenix. I wore my best suit and arrived early with Sarah. Patricia showed up with her attorney, a slick-looking guy named David Marsh who had the kind of expensive suit and perfect hair that screamed high-priced lawyer. Judge Catherine Morrison presided over the hearing. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with a sharp gaze that missed nothing. After the preliminaries, Patricia's attorney presented their case first. He showed the photographs of the damaged driveway and lawn, presented testimony from Patricia's landscaper, who claimed the damage was consistent with tree root intrusion, and argued that my negligence in maintaining my tree had caused significant property damage. When it was our turn, Sarah was methodical and devastating. She presented Dr. Chen's full report, complete with ground-penetrating radar images, soil analysis, and photographic evidence of Patricia's broken sprinkler system. She explained in detail how the damage patterns were inconsistent with root intrusion and perfectly consistent with water damage from faulty irrigation. Then she called Dr. Chen to testify. He walked the judge through his findings step by step, using scientific terminology and presenting his credentials. He'd brought his laptop and showed the GPR images on the courtroom's display screen, pointing out exactly where roots would appear if they were present, and showing that they weren't. In my professional opinion, based on 30 years of experience as a certified arborist, Dr. Chen concluded, there is zero evidence that Mr. Valdez's oak tree caused any damage to Mrs. Henderson's property. The damage is entirely self-inflicted due to improper maintenance of her irrigation system. Judge Morrison asked several pointed questions, and Dr. Chen answered each one clearly and confidently. Then she turned to Patricia's landscaper, who had been sitting in the gallery. "Mr. Torres," the judge said, "you testified that the damage was consistent with root intrusion. What are your qualifications for making that assessment?" The landscaper, a young guy who couldn't have been more than 25, shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I've been doing landscaping for 7 years and I've seen root damage before." "Are you a certified arborist?" "No, madam." "Do you have any formal training in tree biology or root systems?" "No, madam, but I know what root damage looks like." "Except in this case you were wrong," the judge said flatly. She looked at Patricia's attorney. "Mr. Marsh, do you have any evidence to contradict Dr. Chen's findings?" Marsh stood up, looking less confident than before. "Your Honor, we believe our landscaper's observations are valid, and we stand by our claim." "Based on what?" Judge Morrison asked. "You have a landscaper with no formal qualifications contradicting a PhD arborist with 30 years of experience and scientific evidence. This isn't even close." The judge spent a few more minutes reviewing the documents, then she made her ruling. I'm granting the defendant's motion to dismiss with prejudice, Judge Morrison said. The plaintiff has failed to present any credible evidence supporting her claims. Moreover, it appears this lawsuit was filed without proper investigation or merit. Mr. Valdez, your counterclaim for attorney's fees is granted. Mrs. Henderson, you'll be responsible for paying Mr. Valdez's legal costs. I'm also sanctioning you personally in the amount of $5,000 for filing a frivolous lawsuit. This case is dismissed. The gavel came down, and I felt like I could breathe for the first time in 2 months. Patricia looked like she'd been slapped. Her attorney gathered his papers quickly, probably already thinking about how to minimize his own liability for taking such a weak case. Outside the courtroom, Sarah was beaming. That went even better than I expected. We'll submit our fee documentation, and you should get a judgment for the full amount within a few weeks. Thank you, I said, shaking her hand. I couldn't have done this without you. Actually, Sarah said, we're not quite done yet. We still have the embezzlement issue to deal with. That afternoon, Sarah contacted the Maricopa County Attorney's Office and provided them with all the evidence of Patricia's theft from the HOA. She also helped Marcus and the other homeowners file a formal complaint with the Arizona Corporation Commission, which oversees HOAs in the state. The investigation moved quickly. Within 2 weeks, a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit contacted me for an interview. I told him everything I knew and provided copies of all the HOA documents Marcus had gathered. The detective was thorough and professional, and he seemed genuinely angry that someone in a position of trust had abused it so badly. We see this more often than you'd think, Detective Ramirez told me. HOA board members have access to funds with minimal oversight, and some of them can't resist the temptation. But $90,000 is significant. This is felony theft. 3 days before Christmas, Patricia Henderson was arrested at her home. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. I watched from my window as 2 police cars pulled up to her house, and officers knocked on her door. Patricia was led out in handcuffs, and the image of her perfect blonde hair and yoga outfit contrasting with the metal restraints was something I knew I'd never forget. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly, our quiet subdivision was all over the Phoenix media. HOA president arrested for embezzlement was the headline, and reporters knocked on doors throughout the neighborhood looking for comments. I declined to speak to them, but Marcus and several other homeowners were happy to share their stories of Patricia's harassment and abuse of power. The criminal case proceeded through the system over the next several months. Patricia initially pleaded not guilty, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. The HOA's bank records clearly showed the unauthorized payments, and there was no documentation supporting any legitimate reason for those funds. Her attorney eventually negotiated a plea deal. Patricia would plead guilty to 1 count of felony theft, pay full restitution to the HOA plus interest, serve 18 months in prison, and be banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona for 10 years. The sentencing hearing was in March. I attended along with about 20 other homeowners from the neighborhood. We all wanted to see justice done. Patricia looked dramatically different from the woman I'd known. She'd lost weight, her hair was undyed and showing gray roots, and she wore a simple dress instead of her usual expensive outfits. She read a prepared statement apologizing for her actions, but it felt hollow and rehearsed. Judge Morrison, the same judge who dismissed Patricia's lawsuit against me, handled the sentencing. She wasn't sympathetic. Mrs. Henderson, you held a position of trust in your community, the judge said. Your neighbors elected you to manage their collective resources and maintain their neighborhood. Instead, You stole from them. You used your authority to harass and intimidate people who questioned you. And when someone stood up to you, you filed a frivolous lawsuit in an attempt to bully them into submission. Your behavior was reprehensible, and you've earned every day of the sentence I'm about to impose." The judge accepted the plea deal terms, and Patricia was led away by bailiffs to begin her prison sentence. As I watched her go, I didn't feel triumphant or victorious. I just felt tired. This whole ordeal had consumed months of my life and cost me thousands of dollars in stress, legal fees, and lost work time. Even though I'd been vindicated and would eventually be reimbursed for my legal costs, I couldn't get that time back. But there was a silver lining. With Patricia gone, the neighborhood came together in a way it hadn't in years. We held an emergency HOA meeting and elected new board members. Marcus Thompson became the new president, and he immediately implemented transparency measures. All financial records would be posted online for homeowners to review. Board meetings would be open to all residents, and any expenditure over $500 would require approval from a majority of the board. The new board also reviewed all of Patricia's previous violation notices and fines. They overturned dozens of them, including Marcus's garden gnome fine and my trash can violation. They updated the covenant to be more reasonable and less nitpicky, focusing on real issues that affected property values rather than petty aesthetic complaints. My oak tree became something of a celebrity in the neighborhood. People started calling it the Justice Tree, and more than one neighbor thanked me for standing up to Patricia. Some of them confided that they'd wanted to fight back against her tyranny, but had been too afraid of retaliation. My willingness to defend myself had given them hope that the system could work. I used the settlement money from Patricia to do something I'd been putting off. I hired a professional tree service to do a thorough health assessment and pruning of my oak. Not because I thought there was anything wrong with it, but because I wanted to ensure it would be healthy for another 50 years. The tree service confirmed what Dr. Chen had said. The oak was in excellent condition, with a well-maintained root system that posed no threat to any surrounding properties. By early summer, life in Sunset Ridge had settled into a new normal. The neighborhood felt friendlier, more relaxed. People actually talked to each other instead of viewing everyone with suspicion. The pool area, which had been full of restrictive rules under Patricia's regime, became a gathering place where families could actually enjoy themselves without fear of violation notices. I ran into Patricia's husband, Greg, at the grocery store one day. He'd stayed in the house through everything, though I'd heard they were getting divorced. He looked exhausted and embarrassed when he saw me. "Quinton," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything Patricia put you through. I didn't know about the embezzlement, I swear. I should have paid more attention to what she was doing. I didn't know what to say to that. It's not your fault, Greg. You're not responsible for her choices." "Still," he said, "she ruined a lot of lives, including her own. And for what? $90,000 and some feeling of power. It was so stupid." He walked away before I could respond, and I felt a pang of sympathy for him. He'd been married to Patricia for over 20 years, and now he was left to pick up the pieces of the disaster she'd created. As for Dr. Chen, he became my go-to expert for anything tree-related. I recommended him to everyone I knew, and his business boomed with referrals. He later told me that my case had become one of his favorite stories to tell at Arborist conferences, an example of how proper scientific investigation could overcome false accusations and save someone from financial ruin. Sarah Winters, my attorney, also benefited from the case. The publicity generated several new clients for her practice, and she developed a specialty in HOA disputes. She told me that HOA abuse was far more common than most people realized, and there was a real need for lawyers willing to stand up to overreaching boards and corrupt officials. The financial resolution took several months to sort out completely. Patricia was ordered to pay my attorney's fees, which totaled $18,000, plus court costs and the $5,000 sanction. Since she was in prison and had limited assets, the payments came slowly through a garnishment of her pension and eventual sale of her house. I didn't particularly care about getting the money quickly. Just knowing I'd been vindicated was enough. The HOA restitution was handled separately through the criminal case. Patricia's house was sold to pay back the stolen funds, and the proceeds were deposited back into the HOA account. The new board used some of that money to finally fix long-neglected issues in the common areas, including resurfacing the pool deck, repairing the playground equipment, and upgrading the security lighting. One thing that struck me throughout this whole experience was how broken the HOA system could be when the wrong person got into power. Patricia had been elected because she was the only one willing to volunteer for the position, and once she had that authority, there was virtually no oversight. She could fine people arbitrarily, file lawsuits using HOA funds, and steal money with minimal risk of detection. It was only because she'd gotten greedy and targeted the wrong person that her schemes had unraveled. I became something of an advocate for HOA reform in Arizona. I testified before a state legislative committee that was considering new regulations for homeowner associations, sharing my story and recommending mandatory financial audits, term limits for board members, and stronger protections for homeowners against retaliatory actions. Some of those recommendations eventually became law, though the legislative process was slow and frustrating. My relationship with my neighbors improved dramatically. People who had previously kept to themselves started organizing block parties and community events. We had a 4th of July barbecue in the common area that drew over 100 residents, something that never would have happened under Patricia's rule. The neighborhood felt like an actual community instead of a collection of people living in fear of the HOA police. I also learned some valuable lessons about standing up for yourself. For years, I'd been the type of person who avoided conflict, who paid fines rather than arguing, who just wanted to keep the peace. Patricia's lawsuit had forced me out of that comfort zone, and while it was stressful and expensive, it ultimately made me stronger. I learned that sometimes you have to fight back against bullies, even when it's scary and uncertain. The most satisfying moment came about a year after the lawsuit was dismissed. I was working in my front yard, doing some routine maintenance on my garden beds, when a family drove by slowly, looking at houses. They stopped in front of my property, and a woman rolled down her window. "Excuse me," she called out. "Is this the neighborhood with the famous oak tree?" I was confused. "I'm sorry, what?" "We read an article about this neighborhood and an HOA case involving an oak tree." "Is this it?" I realized she was talking about the publicity from Patricia's case. "Yes, that's my tree right there." The woman smiled. "That's amazing. We're looking to buy a house in this area, and when we read about how the neighborhood came together to get rid of a corrupt HOA president, we knew this was the kind of community we wanted to be part of. Do you know if there are any homes for sale here?" I ended up spending 20 minutes talking to this family, telling them about the neighborhood and how much it had improved over the past year. They eventually bought a house 3 streets over and became active members of the community. It was a reminder that sometimes good things come from bad situations, and that standing up for what's right can have ripple effects you never anticipate. Patricia served 14 months of her 18-month sentence and was released early for good behavior. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd moved to Tucson to live with a sister, trying to rebuild her life away from the community she'd damaged. I never saw her again, and I was fine with that. I didn't hate her, but I didn't need any closure or reconciliation. Some chapters in life are meant to stay closed. My oak tree still stands tall in my front yard, providing shade and beauty just as it has for decades. Every time I look at it, I'm reminded of the ordeal I went through and how close I came to financial disaster over something I didn't do. I'm reminded of the importance of expert testimony, good legal representation, and standing up to people who abuse their authority. The tree also reminds me that natural systems have their own logic and rhythm. Oak trees don't aggressively attack neighboring properties. They grow where conditions are favorable. They seek water and nutrients through established patterns, and they coexist peacefully with their surroundings when properly maintained. Patricia's sprinklers, on the other hand, were a human system that malfunctioned because no one bothered to maintain or monitor them properly. It was a fitting metaphor for the whole situation. I still live in the same house in Gilbert, still work from home, and still maintain my property to reasonable standards. The difference now is that I'm not afraid of the HOA anymore. I know my rights. I know how to fight back if necessary, and I'm part of a community that has learned the same lessons. We're vigilant about who we elect to the board, we review the finances regularly, and we don't tolerate abuse of power. Marcus has been an excellent HOA president, focused on actually improving the neighborhood rather than wielding power over residents. Under his leadership, property values in Sunset Ridge have increased, resident satisfaction is at an all-time high, and the whole atmosphere of the community has transformed. It's proof that HOAs can be positive forces when run by people with good intentions and proper oversight. Looking back on everything that happened, from that first horrible moment when I opened the lawsuit papers to watching Patricia being led away in handcuffs to the reforms that followed, I can see how one person's greed and abuse of power created a catalyst for positive change. I wish it hadn't required such a stressful and expensive ordeal, but I'm grateful for how it turned out. The financial costs were significant, but I eventually recouped most of my expenses. The emotional cost was harder to quantify. The stress, the sleepless nights, the anxiety of facing a lawsuit and the possibility of financial ruin. But I also gained something valuable: confidence in myself and in the justice system when it works properly. I learned that truth and evidence matter, that experts can make a difference, and that standing up to bullies is worth the effort. Dr. Chen's report was the key to everything. Without his thorough, scientific investigation, I might have lost the case or been forced to settle for thousands of dollars I didn't owe. His expertise turned, he said, she said, dispute into a clear-cut demonstration of fact versus fiction. It was a powerful reminder that in our complex modern world, specialized knowledge and professional credentials matter immensely. I also came to appreciate good legal representation. Sarah Winters didn't just defend me against Patricia's lawsuit. She went on the offensive, filed counterclaims, and helped expose the larger pattern of corruption. She turned what could have been a defensive battle into an opportunity for justice and reform. That proactive approach made all the difference. The neighbors who stepped forward to support me were crucial too. Marcus Thompson's investigation into the HOA finances provided the evidence needed to pursue criminal charges. Other homeowners who shared their stories of Patricia's harassment helped establish a pattern of abuse. None of us could have taken her down alone, but together we were strong enough to demand accountability. There are still moments when I think about what might have happened if I'd chosen differently. What if I just paid Patricia the $47,000 to avoid the hassle? I'd be broke, but the ordeal would have been over quickly. What if I'd tried to settle for some smaller amount, admitting partial responsibility even though I'd done nothing wrong? The answer is clear to me now. Giving in to bullies only encourages them. Patricia would have continued to target people, continued to steal from the HOA, continued to abuse her power. Someone had to stop her, and I'm glad it was me. My experience also opened my eyes to how common HOA disputes are and how vulnerable homeowners can be to overreach by board members. I joined an online forum for people dealing with HOA issues, and the stories were eye-opening. People being fined thousands of dollars for minor paint color variations. Elderly residents being foreclosed on for unpaid dues they didn't know about. Families forced to remove vegetable gardens or children's play equipment because they violated arbitrary aesthetic rules. The system is ripe for abuse, and reform is desperately needed. I've tried to use my experience to help others facing similar situations. I've shared Dr. Chen's contact information with dozens of people dealing with tree-related HOA disputes. I've recommended Sarah Winters to neighbors in other subdivisions who are fighting their own battles. I've testified at public hearings and written letters to legislators about the need for HOA reform. It's my way of turning a negative experience into something constructive. The irony of the whole situation isn't lost on me. Patricia tried to blame me for damage caused by her own negligence. She filed a lawsuit without proper evidence, tried to use her position as HOA president to intimidate me into settling, and ultimately destroyed her own life through her greed and arrogance. It was a spectacular case of someone digging their own grave, and while I take no pleasure in her downfall, I can't deny that justice was served. My oak tree continues to thrive, and I've become something of an amateur tree enthusiast because of this experience. I've learned about root systems, tree biology, and proper maintenance techniques. I have the tree inspected annually now, not because I'm worried about legal issues, but because I want to preserve this magnificent specimen for future generations. It's become a symbol of resilience and natural beauty in the neighborhood, and I'm proud to be its caretaker. The settlement funds I received from Patricia, minus what I'd already spent on legal fees and expert witnesses, went into a savings account I call my Justice Fund. It's my safety net for any future legal issues, though I hope I never need it again. Just knowing it's there gives me peace of mind and a sense that the ordeal actually resulted in something positive and tangible. Life in Sunset Ridge today is vastly different from what it was under Patricia's rule. The neighborhood has become a place where people want to live, not a place where they feel trapped by an authoritarian HOA board. We've had several families move in specifically because they heard about the reforms and the community spirit. Property values have increased by 15% since Patricia's arrest, which benefits everyone. I occasionally wonder what Patricia thinks about now, living in Tucson, trying to rebuild her life as a convicted felon. Does she regret her actions? Does she understand how much damage she caused to so many people? Does she realize that if she'd just done her job properly as HOA president instead of stealing and harassing people, none of this would have happened? I'll never know, and honestly, I don't need to. Her story is over as far as I'm concerned, while mine continues in a much better direction. The Justice Tree has become part of the neighborhood's identity. Parents tell their kids about how important it is to stand up for what's right. New residents ask about its history. It's been photographed, featured in local news stories, and has even been mentioned in a few national articles about HOA reform. For a tree that was nearly blamed for $47,000 in damage it didn't cause, it's achieved a kind of celebrity status that makes me smile. I think about the whole experience sometimes when I'm sitting in my backyard, enjoying the shade of the oak tree's canopy. The lawsuit, the investigation, the court hearings, the criminal charges, and the ultimate resolution all seem almost surreal now, like something that happened to someone else. But then I remember the stress I felt opening that envelope, the fear of financial ruin, the anger at being falsely accused, and I know it was very real. I survived it, learned from it, and came out stronger on the other side. That's the real lesson here. When someone in authority abuses their power and targets you unfairly, you have options. You can fight back with facts, evidence, and proper legal representation. You can expose corruption and demand accountability. You can refuse to be intimidated or bullied into submission. It won't be easy, it won't be cheap, and it won't be quick, but it can be done. Justice is possible when good people stand up and demand it. My oak tree stands as a testament to that truth. It weathered Patricia's false accusations, just as it has weathered decades of Arizona sun, wind, and storms. It continues to grow, continues to provide beauty and shade, and continues to remind everyone in the neighborhood that truth and justice can prevail over lies and abuse of power. And that's a legacy I'm proud to be part of, even though I never asked for any of it. The story of how an HOA Karen sued me for tree root damage, only to have an arborist prove her sprinklers caused it instead, has become part of neighborhood lore. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority, the importance of expert testimony, and the value of standing up for yourself. It's also a reminder that sometimes the people who accuse others the loudest are the ones with the most to hide. Patricia Henderson learned that lesson the hard way, and Sunset Ridge is better off because of it.